What's up, everybody, and welcome to Q&A, the show where I take your questions from YouTube and answer them here in video format. And as the season has officially ended, at least for the Cleveland Browns, well, you guys had a lot of questions, so let's just jump into them. First one comes from Christian Pawar, who says, do you think the Browns' offense will improve next year with Odell back? I'm wondering if the narrative that Baker is better with Odell is true. Here's the thing with that narrative. One, it is a narrative. We don't know if that's fact. Now, there are some stats that will kind of make it seem like that, but also the one variable that's not added in there that only people are paying attention to, the Odell Beckham being there or not. The other variable is Baker Mayfield having more time in the system. I think he benefited more from that later on in the season than not having Odell Beckham. So I'd be very interested to see what this offense does look like. And part of the reason I feel like that narrative isn't true is because I saw how well these two were playing with each other in training camp when they were able to get reps on top of reps on top of reps and things like that, how well they were able to connect. And I can see the potential there with how well Baker's playing, how good of a wide receiver Odell is. Odell is somebody who can and has played in structure with Eli Manning. So I just don't think this is a Brian Hoyer, Josh Gordon situation where Josh Gordon could only play while improvising. Odell Beckham is actually the opposite. While improvising, he's not Odell Beckham, and that's what you saw a lot in 2019. But when he's working within the structure of the offense, that's where he is the most dangerous wide receiver, or was one of the most dangerous wide receivers in the NFL. So I would be very excited and interested to see what those two can do together with the whole year in the system. Think Stephon Diggs with Josh Allen and the leap that helped Josh Allen make. I think there can be a similar thing here with Odell and Baker once they get both used to being in this system. And I don't think that's going to take more than this offseason to see. And if not, you can always trade him during the season next year, right? Once he gets healthy. So you have a ton of options. Next question comes from John, who says, nice and simple question, Q. Who needs to stay and who needs to go on the defensive side of the ball? Ronnie Harrison needs to stay. I'm torn on whether Larry Ogunjobi needs to stay or not. Depends on the price he's going to command in the open market. Given that he didn't have a stellar year, you might be able to get him back cheap. And since you don't have a ton of depth there on the interior defensive line, I would try to keep him, if possible, under the decent number because you want some known quantities, people who know that defense in the system there, on top of some pieces you want to bring in. Olivier Vernon's as good as gone. Towards Achilles means he's going to be out for at least another season on top of the end of this season. So he's probably not going to be anywhere for about a year. Andrew Sedale probably is going to come back with a cheap number. That would make a lot of sense to play backup free safety. You would look at adding another free safety to start there or compete with Grant Delpit whenever Grant Delpit's able to come back and practice. Then Terrence Mitchell, somebody you might want to bring back. And then everybody else is pretty much, Carl Joseph can go, Kevin Johnson can go. You can move different ways with those guys. You don't really have anybody super expensive other than Olivier Vernon coming off the cap that would be eligible to come back. I think the most expensive person you would re-sign would probably be Larry Ogunjobi, and even then I don't think he's going to be that expensive. So interesting situation defensively. I don't think you need to purge the entire defense just because depth has been an issue this year. So purging everybody, I don't know if that solves that problem just because you bring more faces in. You need to keep some guys, develop some guys, and then also bring some guys to help them develop along as well. So I don't think a full-blown purge, as many people are suggesting, is the solution there. I think you need to keep a lot of these guys and then build on top of that. The next question comes from Spencer S. Do you think the last Browns drive should have been called differently? They played so conservatively. It's just up to what they were able to do at that, or what they were able to execute with the personnel they had on the field. And one of the things that's not talked about, and look, I get it, nobody wants to poop on Blake Hance because he did good considering the job he was asked to do. But when you have a third stringer in there, somebody who doesn't even naturally play left tackle or was expected to play left tackle, and at left tackle, that's going to handcuff a lot of the creativity that you have in the playbook. And the unfortunate thing about the drive before where they actually scored is they had so many fourth downs and third and longs on that drive, they had emptied out the playbook before they even got to that drive. So they just didn't have that many tricks left. They had to use it all just to get to the point where they were 5 points down. So yes, it was called a little conservatively, but I don't know how exotic they could have went given that the protections weren't holding up on that drive. But thank you for the question, Spencer. Next question comes from Ray Jackson. He says, is Myles still that 2020 Myles that we saw in the early year, or did the virus damage his athleticism? Did he lose a step permanently? Nah, because the step was there in Kansas City. He just got hurt through that game. I think Myles will be back to normal eventually here. I don't think he fully lost the step because the burst is always there with Myles. It just, sometimes it was stamina. And thinking the last two games, it wasn't stamina more than it was Pittsburgh just blocking him well and putting up like a nice protection plan against him. Against Kansas City, he was getting decent pressure. He just wasn't breaking loose, and sometimes that happens with Myles. Also, another thing we should just also look at is that Myles started that season so hot, he was eventually going to cool off. So part of that might have been him getting the virus and it cooling him off a little bit. Another part might have just been he was due for a cool off at that point. He had like a ridiculous, like 10 sacks in 10 games, like 5 strip sacks. He started the season so hot, he had to cool down at some point. So I think that's also something to do with it. The next question comes from Lamont, who says, why didn't Stefanski go for it on 4th and 11? I think it was 4th and 8. But that's a tough call there, right? 4th and 8, the offense wasn't really moving well. You weren't protecting well enough to think you can have confidence to draw up a play where you can guarantee every route has a chance to get those 8 yards. I understand why you would want to punt the ball, hope you can get the stop, regroup offensively, and see what you can do then out the hurry up on a last-minute drive. I get the idea behind it. I also get the argument for going for it because one thing Baker Mayfield has been good at is 4th and long for whatever reason this season, right? He's come through on those moments. So I get why a lot of Browns fans are like, hey, Baker could come through on that. I think Baker could have come through, but I just don't know if the protections would have held up long enough. If you look at that drive, a lot of what blew that drive up was the protections just not holding up at the wrong time. On that 3rd and long play there where it ended up going to Kareem Hunt as a check down, he had a route wide open that he was going to take, but Chris Jones just got in his face too early for him to make that throw. So, that's unfortunate. It's due to some of the limitations that the Browns finally had to deal with as far as reality goes, with all the injuries that they had going on, all the patchwork they were doing both on offense and defense, and it ended up biting them in the butt. It was the Cowboys' last stand on that drive, and unfortunately, we just didn't have enough. The next question is from Chris the Goat, who says, what's the takeaway from the Browns' year this year? They did exactly what they set out to do as far as fan expectation. Any reasonable fan expectation was, hey, let's see if Baker's the guy. Let's see if Kevin Stefanski's the guy. This team should go over 500. This team should be a double-digit win team. This team should go to the playoffs. And you know what? They should win a playoff game. That's what you should expect from this team. Well, Baker proved he was the guy. Kevin Stefanski proved he was the guy. They won more than 10 games. They went to the playoffs, and they won one. They did exactly what everybody expected them to do, at least in Cleveland, that had high expectations of them going into the year, including myself. They checked every box. So this is a successful season. The fact that you felt like you could have got more out of the season given all the injuries, right? No Odell, no Nick Chubb for a portion of the season, no Wyatt Teller for a portion of the season, adds to the potential that this team has going forward. This next question is from Connor Barnett, who says, is Joe Woods the problem or bad personnel or both? Sometimes it's Joe Woods, right? Against the Jets, that was a Joe Woods, what are you doing kind of game, right? Just terrible calls. Against the Ravens, I think he had a lot more to do with that. Against the Chiefs, I don't think that had a lot to do with Joe Woods. Had a lot to do with your defensive line not getting pressure, not being deep enough outside of Myles Garrett. Had a lot to do with your secondary just not having the manpower to hold up against a team that has the amount of weapons that even Pittsburgh has at wide receivers, but also Kansas City has at wide receiver. So if you're the Browns, it's somewhere you want to invest, somewhere where you want to get stronger at, and you don't have to match teams like Kansas City and Pittsburgh tick for tat when it comes to corner and wide receiver, right? But but you do have to have enough there to slow him down a little bit, get him off the field every once in a while. And I think that's where the personnel becomes a problem for the Cleveland Browns. Next question comes from Brian Jones. It says, hey, Quincy, love your vids. Do you think the Browns should trade Odell for a better defensive back? No. They're not going to get anybody who's as good as Odell is as a wide receiver at defensive back. You're not going to get like Stephon Gilmore or something ridiculous like that for Odell Beckham. Nobody normally does stuff like that, especially when Odell is coming off of an ACL surgery. So you're better off. Your best return for Odell is Odell, which is just waiting for Odell to come back healthy and seeing what you could do with him post ACL surgery. Next question comes from Phil and Dangerous 113, who says, do you think the Browns retain Njoku or do they find an upgraded tight end slot? Well, they signed him to his 5th year, so they were forward thinking in this. They got him next year for $5 million, I believe. So unless they don't like that cap number, it looks like David Njoku's probably going to be on the team next year. But that's it for all the questions for this week. Thank you guys for asking them. I hope you guys stay tuned for some of the off-season programming that's going to be coming on this channel. But you guys have a great day. Have a good night.